Hillsdale College is a small, Christian, classical liberal arts college that operates independently of government funding, and we want you or your son or daughter to apply. At Hillsdale, students grow in heart and mind by studying timeless truths in a supportive community dedicated to the highest things. Hillsdale College costs significantly less than other nationally ranked private liberal arts colleges and receives regular recognition as a best value, and nearly all students receive financial aid. Our robust core curriculum, vibrant student life, and 8-to-1 student-to-faculty ratio make for an education like no other. For more information or to fill out an application, visit hillsdale.edu/info. That's hillsdale.edu/info.
Welcome to the Hillsdale College K-12 Classical Education Podcast, bringing you insight into classical education and its unique emphasis on human virtue and moral character, responsible citizenship, content-rich curricula, and teacher-led classrooms. Now your host, Scott Bertram.
We continue a series of episodes from presentations delivered at Hoogland Center for Teacher Excellence seminars. The Hoogland Center for Teacher Excellence, an outreach of the Hillsdale College K-12 Education Office, offers educators the opportunity to deepen their content knowledge and refine their skills in the classroom. These one-day conferences are hosted during the academic year in cities across the nation and feature presentations by Hillsdale College faculty, K-12 office staff, and leaders in the Hillsdale network of member schools. There is no cost to attend, and attendees may earn professional development credits. Currently, the Hoogland Center is hosting a series exploring the art of teaching a variety of subjects. To learn more about upcoming events, visit our website, k12.hillsdale.edu.
Okay, good morning. I'm Sarah. Again, I don't usually go with my first name at our school. It's, Mrs. Martin. But you guys can call me Sarah. I'm so glad to be here with you. Thank you for being here. Again, thank you for what you do. I know teaching is really difficult and takes a lot of work, especially in elementary school. There's just a lot more going on with those little people and everything they bring in that we just get to care for them. So I'm really thankful for the work that you guys do and just for taking the time to come here and learn a little bit. I hope that this is helpful. I hope that it's practical. And I hope that I can kind of stir up for us the joy of what we do so that you can go out reinvigorated to just continue doing that work. So getting to talk about teaching is exciting for me. It's something I'm passionate about. Education is a really important and beautiful thing. I'm really passionate about what Hillsdale's doing in education. I'm excited for those of you who don't know about that to get to learn a little bit about that today. It's really exciting, a really exciting thing. And it's interesting that I'm excited to talk about teaching history because as a student, I didn't like history. I don't know if any of you had that experience. In my mind, history was the boring subject where I have to sit and listen about facts and people and events that don't seem to mean anything to me. I memorize it, I take the test, I move on. That was my thought about history. So when I got into teaching, I was surprised that kids actually like history and they have questions about it. And it's interesting to them innately. And that has to do a little bit with the fact that children are curious. They have a lot of questions. Something that's a part of who we are as human beings is that we want to know things. We seek knowledge. You don't have to study philosophy to come to that conclusion. If you spend time with children long enough, you will discover that. They ask a lot of questions. And something that history does is it answers a lot of those questions. And it's exciting for them to get to think about what was it like in the past and how were things different? And they can use their imagination in that way. And I think that curiosity is natural in children, but if we don't teach it in a way that draws out that curiosity and that wonder, we can maybe inadvertently stifle that. That was the experience that I had. I didn't come out of my education loving history. It was the opposite, and it took a while for me to sort of rediscover the beauty of it. And part of that was teaching and being around children and experiencing that wonder. So I think we have a lot of power as educators with how we present material. And we have a great calling, I think, as teachers of drawing out the wonder, especially in teaching young children and helping them to carry that on throughout their education. So today we're just going to talk a little bit about what does it look like to teach American history to those young students. My focus is going to be how we do that. I think that's the really important thing. But I think before we talk about that, it is good to establish, why do we teach American history? Why do we care about it? Why do we put it in front of young children? And then we'll get into how to teach American history. The content itself is rich and beautiful, but again, the way we present it is important. And then I'll just offer some suggestions for thinking about lesson planning in history and maybe how to assess younger students on the things that they're learning. So why do we teach American history? First, it's interesting. It's exciting. There's a lot to learn. Again, children are naturally curious, and history allows us to dig into that curiosity, and they do have this inclination towards knowing about things that happened before they were alive. If we're talking about elementary students, these kids have maybe been in the world for 10 years, 11 years. So much has happened before their short lives, and it's exciting to them. I think, too, in education, we can focus on, okay, what are they getting out of this? What's the end goal of teaching this content? And those things aren't bad, but something that I think we want to try to preserve in our classrooms is just the delight in learning something. And history is something that is innately delightful. And so if we overemphasize the practical uses of it, we can take that away from our students. So I think just acknowledging the fact that this is just an interesting and exciting thing to talk about, and that is enough, is really important. History also offers heroes to our students. Our history, American history, is full of men and women who have done really incredible things. They've showed courage, they've showed perseverance, they've gone through hardship, and that's inspiring to our kids. We get to put these people in front of them that they can look up to. We also have people in our history that did not so great things, and I think that's something our students can learn from as well. What were those poor actions and the results of those actions, and what can we learn from those things? History also offers valuable content knowledge to our students. There's a lot of research to show that one of the core components of students being able to read well is having a store of background knowledge. If they encounter a text that has content they're not familiar with, they're less likely to be able to understand and engage with that text. And so building this storehouse of knowledge from them, from history, is just filling their toolbox a little bit better to be able to do that. Also, as they move forward in their education and hopefully encounter more and more texts from our own history, those primary documents, having that content knowledge that maybe those writers would assume their readers would have is going to be really important for them. American history also teaches our students, what does it mean to be American? Who are we? Where have we come from? Those are questions that children are asking, and as they grow, they'll continue to ask those questions. We ask those questions as adults. So we're giving them that framework to think about, what does it mean to live in this country? What's special about our country? What's unique about our country's history compared to countries around the world and other places? And then, what do they inherit as citizens of America? What are their rights as citizens in America? What duties do they have as citizens? Our history teaches them that, answers those questions. And then going outside of that, history as a whole, it teaches our students, what does it mean to be human? History is the story of people, and we are inheritors of that past. And so how does that inform our students of what does it mean to be human? Times and places are different that we talk about in history, but there are things about what it means to be human that are constant, that we can see, and we learn from that. We share something in common with the people that have come before us. It also allows for our students to have a freer mind. The more content they have, the more knowledge they have, the more of an ability they have to think. They have a wider perspective. It's why we talk about the liberal arts, literally means arts that free us. One famous American that I love talking about with my students is Frederick Douglass, and he firsthand learned the importance of knowledge and said, knowledge is what makes man unfit to be a slave. We're freer the more that we know, and that's a gift that we can give to our students. So that's just a little bit about why we teach American history. It's important. It's delightful to children. It's exciting. It has valuable lessons to teach them. So how do we preserve that delight in our students so that they don't go on to be middle schoolers or high schoolers or adults that think of it as this boring thing, just this list of facts that I had to learn and I don't remember most of them? That's not what we want. And so I think we have to think about what history is. And it may seem obvious because we have the word story in the word history. But if you look at the etymology of those two words, it's actually interesting to see the common roots that they share and that these words were in a way thought of synonymously. History is just a story of things that have happened in the past, the story of people that lived in the past. And we get to bring that story into the present lives of our students in the classroom. And so I think if we teach history in that way, thinking about it as a story, that's a way that we can delight our students. Children love stories. They love to be told stories. And that's something that we can do in history class. Just because it's true doesn't mean we can't treat it that way. So tell a story. Use your storytelling abilities when you're teaching history. We are going to talk about facts and people and things that really happened, but if we frame it in this narrative way, it's a much more joyful experience to teach. It's much more interesting to teach, and it's joyful for our students. And one way we do this is by immersing students in the world of the past. This again may be obvious, but when we're teaching history, I think it's important that we stay in the past. There are going to be things that maybe relate to what's going on now. We want to talk about, current events, but I think it's really important that we really try to keep our students in the past and immerse them in that world, even in the way that we speak. It's easy when talking about American history to talk about it as, we did this. We fought the British and we won. But we weren't there. We are Americans, and that way we can claim that, but that's just a simple way using different pronouns. It was the colonists that fought, and keeping our students in the past in that way I think is important. I think also when we talk about teaching history, especially to young students, it's important to avoid, if at all possible, teaching history through a particular lens. We as adults might have our own thoughts about history, ways that we interpret it, but what we want to allow for our students to do is come to those conclusions on their own. And our role was, especially with these young kiddos, is to just tell them what happened. What is the story? What are these events? Give them the gift of just walking through that time on their own without kind of spoiling it for them right up at the front. Well, this is why this matters. Well, let's go on a journey of discovery together and maybe figure that out. Another thing that's important, while we want history to be joyful, and it is joyful, and we are teaching students, and we certainly don't want to bore them, history is important, and our history is important, and we want to maintain that tone with them. Take it seriously. Teach them to take it seriously in the way that we talk about it. We don't have to make things silly or gamified for our students to really plug in and delight in the topic. They have that within them naturally if we just draw it out of them. Students also like the opportunity to engage in serious conversation when they get to feel a little bit older than they are. You could tell them, this is a really important thing, this is really serious, but I think you're capable of jumping into it with me. You can talk about it. And they kind of sit up a little bit straighter and they're excited about that. They want to be taken seriously, and so I think if we invite them into that opportunity, they'll take us up on it. And then finally, I think it's important to just say, we should tell the truth. We are talking about young students, and sometimes we want to maybe shield them from certain things. And of course, as teachers, it's our job to use our discernment in the kind of content we put in front of our students. But history is full of people who did great things and people who did not so great things. And it's a story of humans that aren't perfect and made mistakes. It's a story of great things that have been done and the effects of those, and then great tragedies. And I don't think we have to shield those things from our students. We want to show them the whole picture. So I want to talk a little bit more about what does it mean to tell a story in history class. So the first thing we do when we tell a story is we set the stage. This is just as important in history as it would be in literature, just reading a book to a child. You always need to know, where are we? What's the time? So where's the story taking place? We need to position our students in the location. It's important. And this is where geography comes into play. I think geography can be neglected or maybe taught in isolation from history, but it's an important aspect of the story. Where our story and events are taking place is really important and may even have an effect on the story. And a lot of students don't have a good understanding of just where places are. I think if you start asking students to identify countries or cities or continents and their location, you might be surprised that they actually don't know. I was talking to a kindergarten teacher just last week, and she's teaching her students about the Louisiana Purchase, and she realized she has this big map of the United States in her classroom, and they're used to seeing the states on the map, and when they hear Louisiana Purchase, they think the state of Louisiana. And she had to show them a map from the time that's not the case. This is a very different thing that we're talking about, and that's important. Showing students maps, I think, is one of the simplest ways to just get them a little bit more involved in the story. I would always start a lesson by just showing a map, either one I had in my classroom or finding a picture of one that was relevant, and just showing them where we are and maybe where this is in relation to other places that they might recognize. If we've been talking about a different part of the world, we're going to travel to this new part of the world that we're talking about and really situate them in that place. Visuals are really helpful, especially with young students. They can't quite think abstractly, and so the more we can just show them something visually, that just helps them imagine what's going on. The other important part of a setting, when is the story taking place? There is an important place in history for dates. Dates matter. When things are taking place matters. Time is sort of an abstract concept, and for young children, really conceptualizing the passage of time, how far apart events are from each other is really hard. And so a visual that we can give them, another kind of simple thing to incorporate that can make a big difference, is just using a timeline. I've seen teachers that have timelines in their classrooms that they build over the course of the year as they learn different things, maybe getting the students involved with putting things on the timeline. It could be as simple as before the lesson, you draw a timeline on the board, maybe important dates you've talked about, some hinge points for where you're headed. For older students, you might have them build a timeline if they have a history journal and you add things together. But having that visual that they can go back to is really important so they can start to create this picture in their mind of the passage of time. Kind of a funny example, two big events in American history are when the Pilgrims arrive and the Revolutionary War. And in my mind, as a child, those things happen back to back. The Pilgrims get here, and then all of a sudden we're fighting the British. And that's so not true. The Pilgrims arrive in 1620, and then we sign the We did not sign the Declaration of Independence. They signed the Declaration of Independence in 1776. There's a lot of time in between those two things. And what's going on? That's important. But if we're not careful, it's easy for them to sort of mesh these dates together and think they're happening back to back. So next, when we're telling a story, we introduce the characters. I think it's easy to think of history in terms of events, and that's not untrue, but those events don't just happen. People are acting, and those actions and choices have results that we see. And so I think something that maybe is neglected in history that we should strive to incorporate are biographies. Introduce your students to people. They connect with people. They want to get to know them. Abraham Lincoln was the 16th president, but he also was a child, and he grew up in an interesting way, and he received his education in an interesting way. And we know things about the kind of person that he was. And so creating that whole picture for our students of these people that we hear about really allows them to get to know them and to get engaged with them. So introduce your students to those historical characters. When you're telling a story, just like you would in a fictional novel, we get to know them. And then that goes along with the stories being inspiring. Children connect with the stories of these people. I remember, I think I was in second grade, and every week we got to go to the school library. And again, I did not have much interest in history as a student, but the books that I always checked out at the library were biographies. And I still remember it was this whole series of books. They all had these matching blue bindings. And every time I got to go, I would pick a new one. And I remember reading all of these stories of these historical people, and that was interesting to me. Even though I don't remember anything from my second grade history class, I remember the stories of those people that I read. So going along with teaching biography is just keeping human action at the center. We don't want to inadvertently teach our students that things just happen, right? Human action is important, and the choices that humans make are important, and we see the results of those things in history. I think one of the most important things we can teach to young children is the power of our choices. There are things in life that we can't control, of course, we all know that, but there's a lot that we can. And to teach children that the choices that they make are important, and to get to see the results of choices that have been made throughout history shows that to them. So history really is the story of human action and ideas. What have people done? What have they thought? And how has that affected the course of history and brought us to where we are now? And again, events do not just happen. We want to teach them that. Again, I remember in my mind, the sort of picture I had created of American history was that the United States of America just sort of happened. You have the history of the world, and then America shows up. And that's just not true. There was a lot that happened that led to that. People made specific choices. There was a lot of thought that went into forming this country, and that's really important. So once we've set the stage, we know where and when we are. We've met our characters, who's doing the action. Now we're ready to really tell the story. So a history lesson, just like any other story we might tell our students, it has a plot. This might seem obvious, but I think something simple we can do, again, to help our students understand the historical narrative is teach things in order. We wouldn't tell a story jumping around out of order, a fictional story, and history can be the same way. It's hard for them to go back and forth. We want to paint this picture chronologically and show them the cause and effect between different things that are happening so that they get to see this full narrative and they aren't just building a storehouse of isolated events. There's a flow, there's movement that's happening. Sometimes I know we have to, maybe based on the curriculum that we're teaching, jump around a little bit, but I would always try to make it really clear, okay, we're going to a different time, relate it to maybe the time we've been talking about so that they're not getting confused. Again, this helps students see the cause and effect of the different things that are happening that we're talking about. And then part of telling a great story and putting out this plot for your students is being a storyteller. History class should be dynamic. It should be exciting. And part of that is you, the way that you put that material out for your students. This comes more naturally to some people. Some people are just much more animated, and this is part of their personality. This was kind of a challenge for me. I had to really push myself and think about the way that I'm engaging with students, almost thinking of myself as an actor sometimes. So it's something that has to be practiced for some people, and that's okay. But I think it's something to work towards. And then inviting your students to use their imagination. We're talking about something that's true, of course, in history, but they weren't there. And so it takes some imagination for them to think about, what would it have been like to be there? How would it have felt to experience this? Or what might we have seen in this moment? And that's something that you as the teacher can draw out of them and giving them that opportunity to use their imagination and really try to get into that time. You want to bring the past into your classroom. Make the past just for that moment. For the 20 minutes you're teaching history, make the past the present and really get them in that headspace. One easy way to make your story more engaging is just to move around. History was a time when I'm all over the room. I'm in the front, I'm in the back, I'm in the middle, acting out a little bit, using voices, just the inflection of your voice when something really ominous is about to happen or something really exciting or something surprising. You can communicate that, and it's just drawing them into that story a little bit more. And then because you are always going to be a better storyteller than maybe a text that's supporting that story, we want to try to use those as a supplement. They're great resources. Student readers are a great resource. Textbooks are a great resource, but you're communicating that story. Now, there's definitely a time, especially with those younger students, where we might read a story to them, but you're still involved in that story in the way that you're telling that story. And then, like with any good story, you want to leave them on a cliffhanger. Leave them wanting more. End your lesson where they're not quite sure what's going to happen next, and you're not going to tell them. You know, they may ask, you go to recess, please, please, please tell me what's going to happen. No, you have to wait till tomorrow. You want them kind of leaving with that excitement and feeling of, I'm so excited to go to class the next day because I want to know what's going to happen. And then just a way to let your students hear the story from those that were there is just to pull in primary sources. Again, a great supplement to your lesson. With young students, it can be as simple as some quotes, memorable quotes, and then maybe working into parts of documents, looking at speeches. All of that is just a way to draw students in and expose them to history. What was really going on? What were people saying at the time? So I've talked about telling a story, and this is a dynamic thing that's exciting, but by no means do we just want to be talking to our students for the entire lesson and not get them involved. Even if you're telling a super exciting animated story, if it's hard for young students to just sit and listen for a long period of time. And so one of the easiest ways to get students involved with the story and with the lesson is just by asking questions. So I would just always suggest to balance your storytelling with questioning. You don't want to break up that narrative. You want to keep them involved, but stop and ask a couple of questions to get them involved with you, make sure that they're listening, see if they're understanding where the story's headed. It's just a simple way to increase their engagement. If they get a chance to say something, hear their classmates say something, you kind of pause, get their thoughts. It just keeps them tracking with you. It also teaches them to think about what they're learning. We're building these skills in these young students, and having the ability to answer a question or give a thought is just a way that we build that inside of them. It also builds their skills of discussion. So they're learning to listen to each other, maybe to respond. You as the teacher are guiding that, of course. But if they never get the chance to speak, then they're never going to develop that ability, which is something that is really important as they move on in their education. It also allows you to check for understanding. You're up here telling this awesome story and you're super excited. Do they even know what you're talking about? Have they been listening? So just stop and ask. Just make sure. It's a good way for you to, as you're going along, make sure they're getting out of the lesson what you're wanting them to. And then ask different kinds of questions. Of course, we're talking about teaching history, so the facts matter. We want them to know what really happened, when did it happen, who did it, what did they do. So ask those factual questions. Who, what, when, where. Make sure they're recalling that information. Knowing the facts is what will allow them to have a conversation. If we don't have those things right, then what we think about it is going to be skewed as well. But you want to take it a little bit deeper with those why and how questions. And of course, with young students, they need some coaching on this. We have to let them know when their reasoning might not be quite following what we're trying, but we're guiding them there. I remember teaching the Mayans, and it was really exciting because they're this great civilization, and all of a sudden they disappear, and nobody still really knows why. And so asking them, we had this great conversation about why we thought their civilization declined, and it's exciting, and they have all these answers, and they're engaged. And then before I know it, we're talking about aliens, and I had, okay, let's rein it back in, right? So it was exciting, they're engaged, but they still need some guidance in their responses. And then don't allow your students to ask questions. I have definitely been guilty of just being excited or just thinking, oh man, we have a lot to get through. And then I don't give them the chance to ask their questions. And that can be discouraging. We want them to learn how to ask good questions, but also they might be interested in something that you didn't anticipate, and we can't know that until we let them ask. So again, we don't want our students to derail the lesson with their questions, but giving them that space to ask those questions is important. So a good rule of thumb with questions is we don't want to bore our students by not asking any questions. If we just talk and talk and talk, we're going to lose them. But we also, again, we're telling a story, and we don't want to break up that narrative. Too many questions can do that. So it just takes some strategic planning on how we ask questions, how many questions, when we ask questions. Another way to get students engaged in the story is just by using pictures. Again, we want them to use their imagination. So I would say let them imagine what's happening first, describe it really vividly, let them develop that mental picture, but then show them a beautiful picture. Let them really see what it looked like at that time. There are some things in American history we have photographs of. We can really show them. That's really powerful. If you're reading aloud to the students or even using a student reader, show them the pictures. Take time for that. It's not something to skip over. It's helping them create that imagination of what's really going on. Ask questions about what they notice in the picture. That's a great conversation you can have with them. You might be surprised with the things that they're able to pick out. And then works of art and photographs are great. We have beautiful works of art of American history, a lot that you can find online that are just a really great way to illustrate history. And then again, photographs depending on how recent the events took place. So I just have a couple examples. This is a really beautiful painting of Washington crossing the Delaware. You can see how this would kind of let the students imagine this moment. And then a completely different image or photograph of the Gettysburg Address. So we would talk about the Gettysburg Address, what would it have been like to be there, and now we're in the audience. You could barely see Lincoln, all these people crowded around. They could kind of imagine what that would have felt like. And then again, we're talking about children. So activities have a place in history class. We want to give them an opportunity maybe to move or to talk, break up the lesson a little bit. I'm not going to go into specific activities too much just because there's a broad range of what that could look like, but just some suggestions of how to think about activities. So it's a way to create productive breaks. It's important for young children. They sit for a long time, and we want to allow them to have some breaks within the lesson and within the day. But we want to choose activities that draw students further into the story and develop their understanding. So some questions I would always ask before an activity: what's the purpose? If I can't answer it, then maybe we're not going to do that thing. I want to communicate to my students that history is important and worth our time. And so I'm not going to waste their time. I'm going to do something meaningful. And then what will the students learn? Again, if I can't answer this question, I'm probably not doing the activity. There should be something that's drawing them further into the lesson, the thing that I'm trying to teach them. And then it's important to choose activities that are appropriate to the skill level of the students. We don't want to frustrate them by asking them to do something they're not ready to do, right? So a kindergarten history activity is going to be much different than a 5th grade one, and that's perfectly okay. And then just keep it simple. I think we can often overthink activities in the classroom. We need all these materials and all of these different things. But at the end of the day, we're just trying to draw them into the story and make it a little bit more meaningful for them. And so it doesn't have to be overly complicated. This kind of ties in with activities when we're talking about those older elementary students. So note-taking is a really important skill that we need to build in our students. But again, we're still at that elementary age. We're just asking them to delight in that story. So we want to model this for our students. They're not quite ready to do this on our own. We're teaching them a skill. We don't want to, again, frustrate them with having to think about how to formulate these notes. We want them really focusing on that story that we're telling. So model for them. It's a really simple thing to just say, okay, here's how this is going to look. And that frees them up to think about the content that we're putting in front of them. And then I would just recommend incorporating them throughout the lesson. I have lecture in quotation marks because I'm not advocating for lecturing, but I just mean when you're talking to them, it's a good way to break that up. We talk about this a little bit. Okay, let's write a couple things down. We talk about this, let's write a couple things down. So there's that ebb and flow there. And then using questions to prompt those notes. So I'm sure we've all been in a history class where teacher talks, text goes on the screen, we copy it down, and that's kind of the way it goes. But you can make it more dynamic by, of course, you have a plan for where these notes are headed, but you can use questions to draw students into that process. And then, again, note-taking is a really important skill that we want to teach, but don't let this steal the joy of learning. That really is what we want to cultivate in these young students. And so we don't want them thinking of history classes, the class where I write a bunch of things, right? It's where we get to tell and experience this story. All right. So probably many of us have experienced this thought of history as we just memorize all this information. And certainly history is not just memorization. Memorization is important and certainly has a place in our history class. So why should we have our students memorize things? What's the point? Well, it's a great mental exercise. Memorizing things expands our mind, and the more we do it, the more capacity we have for it. It trains our brains in a way that other things might not. It also is building knowledge for our students. At the end of the day, if our students don't remember the things we're teaching them, then have we really taught them? The beautiful thing about teaching history as a story is that stories are memorable, but we still do want them to remember some of these important facts. We want them to walk away with this knowledge. It also allows them to build on their knowledge. Until you've really internalized something and it's gone to your long-term memory, it's hard to pull from that knowledge to build further. So the young elementary years are a great time to build this knowledge inside of them by giving them things that they take with them in their memory that they can build upon later. And what you memorize becomes a part of you. What a gift to our students that they leave our class having memorized a beautiful speech or part of the Declaration of Independence or part of the Constitution. That will go with them forever. And then what to memorize? Not everything, of course. The most important names, dates, and events. And we use discernment as a teacher of what those things are. Probably fewer in kindergarten than in 4th or 5th grade. Quotes, speeches, portions of documents. And then how to memorize. I think this is the really important thing. The way we ask our students to memorize can affect the way that they think about memory. It shouldn't be this drudgery, this great bore that we're asking them to do. It can actually be joyful if we present it in the right way. The way that we really memorize things is through repetition. We wouldn't send hopefully a 2nd or 3rd grader home with a list of dates. Okay, memorize, come back ready for the test. That's not even the way that we as adults remember things. I remember in middle school, to buy my lunch, I had to punch in my social security number, which is kind of strange to think about now, but I had it on a little note and I would go, and after a couple of weeks, I knew it. And I wasn't studying my social security number every night before bed. I used it every single day, and eventually I knew it. And now as an adult, every time I need it, for whatever reason, that comes to mind. And that's how that's how we naturally memorize things. And so using that with our students is the most effective thing. And they have to be trained in how to do this. But one way to make this joyful is just through choral response. Okay, I want us to know this date. I teach it to them, we all say it together, and then all throughout the day I just ask them, during math, when was the Battle of Gettysburg? And they can all tell me. And you just do that enough every day throughout the day when they're least expecting it, and all of a sudden, without even trying, they know what I've asked them to know. It has to come back and come back and come back so that it goes into their long-term memory. And then just saying things all together as a class just creates this energy in the room. My class last year, we memorized the Gettysburg Address. And we just started, day one, first line, let's all say it together. The next day, we add a line. We all say it together all throughout the day. And then before I know it, we've learned it. And it's something that we can all say together. And students actually take joy in this. They like knowing things. They're proud to go home and tell their parents what they can recite and what they know. I had a student who went on a trip to Washington, D.C., and his mom sent me a video of him standing in front of the Lincoln Memorial reciting the Gettysburg Address, and everyone's clapping. And it's a beautiful thing, and he's proud, and what a gift we can give to them. So although we don't want history to be boring, there's a place for memorization, and so we think about how we can incorporate that into the classroom. So just a few points on thinking about lesson planning for American history. Be a student of history yourself. The best thing you can do for your students is to be that storehouse of knowledge that you bestow onto them. Also, it's hard to instill wonder in your students if you haven't experienced it yourself. They can sense that. And so if you've sat with the material and you've asked questions and you've been excited, you can communicate that better to your students. So read or pre-read whatever it is that you're going to put in front of them. And wonder. If you're excited about something, draw that out in your students. If you want to spend a little bit more talking about this topic because it's exciting to you, your students will feed off of that. And then use multiple resources. You may have a textbook that you use or a student reader, but it's good to pull from different resources to kind of create that larger picture of the story that you're telling. And then always begin with the end in mind. Where are we headed? What's the goal? Where am I trying to take my students? And how are we going to get there? So what do I want them to know? At the end of this unit or the end of this lesson, what's that takeaway I really want them to have? So always have an objective for the unit and then for each lesson so you know as a teacher where you're trying to take them and you can check in if they got there or not. And you have to make choices. We're talking about elementary school. They're not going to know everything. They don't need all the details that they would get in an undergraduate or graduate degree in history. We're just creating this picture for them. So we're going to leave things out and that's okay. And then draw on their prior knowledge, either from what they learned in a previous year or in a previous lesson. Connect what you're putting in front of them to that prior knowledge. Again, we're just building this bigger and bigger narrative picture in their mind. And plan and anticipate those questions. You will be a better questioner and get better responses out of your students if you've really thought about what questions you want to ask. And then anticipate their questions. What's going to be confusing? What might I need to clarify? And then choose your images and primary sources ahead of time so that you're ready to put that material in front of them. And then because we're telling a story, our lesson plan should sort of be in terms of beginning, middle, end. If we're teaching the Battle of Gettysburg, how did we get here? What's the goal? Kind of set that story up for them. And then we talk about the battle. What happens? What does each side do? What's the strategy? And then how does it end? So when we're structuring our lesson with all of that in mind, I would always begin with the review. It's a great tool just for teaching. Again, that repetition is really important. So start with review. It also solidifies what is today's lesson, how is it going to relate with things that they've learned before. And then preview with caution. You as the teacher should have an objective. In history, we don't always want to tell our students right at the outset because we're telling a story. Don't spoil the ending. Don't tell them today we're going to learn how Abraham Lincoln died. They don't know that's going to happen yet. And even if they do, we still want to keep that illusion of surprise. And then set the stage. Use that map and timeline. Front load vocabulary If you're having to stop to go over words, you're breaking up the narrative for them. So if you can anticipate maybe those tougher terms they need to know at the beginning, that'll help your story just flow more naturally. And then tell the story. This is the fun part. This should really be the bulk of your lesson. And then follow the lesson with a meaningful activity. How can we follow up with something that really gets them involved in that story? And check for understanding. Did they get what you were hoping that they would? If not, how can we address that next time? But you always, when you get up there and tell this amazing story, and then you ask a question, and all of a sudden, I've had this happen. Okay, we did not draw out of this what I was hoping that we would. That's okay. We can clarify. That's what I'm here for as the teacher. Kind of along that vein, just a couple of suggestions for assessing students. Of course, we want to measure their knowledge and what they've learned. So for those formative assessments that are just happening as we go and kind of forming your instruction, questions are a really great formative assessment. Just the questions that you ask throughout your lesson are letting you know in real time, what are your students learning? Where are they confused? Exit tickets, again, are a really great tool, even with the younger grades, obviously keeping their writing ability in mind. Just a couple questions at the end of class. Do they understand what I was hoping that they would? Written responses, again, in those older grades as we're developing their ability to write about the things that we're learning. A great way for you to check in as a teacher what they're understanding. Maybe for those younger students, some kind of drawing that's representing what they've learned. And then for those summative assessments, again, it's really important to keep the student writing ability in mind. We don't want to ask more of them on an assessment that they're really ready to do. And then using a variety of question types, not all one type of question. And then I think this is the most important part when we're thinking about these summative assessments is how we build them. So just like in your lesson, you're setting the stage, you're starting with those dates, maybe the locations, vocabulary, people. You start your assessment that way, asking these specific questions. And then it kind of builds to where maybe you're asking your students to synthesize information. And how great is if that synthesis can use the information that you've asked at the beginning of the assessment. So you're kind of showing them how to think about putting all of this information together. And then what are the most important points, right? Again, elementary students, they don't have to know everything. And the test doesn't have to ask them to know everything. Just what are those most important points that we're really trying to get them to take home? And again, studying is a skill, just like note-taking. We wouldn't ask our elementary students to go home and pour over this information, right? We're still taking some of that responsibility as a teacher to review, to help them memorize things, to really instill in them the knowledge that we want them to have. So it's still happening a lot in the classroom, even though we're teaching them how to study. And then finally, I just had some resources to suggest when we're thinking about storytelling to our students and learning more about American history ourselves. So the first two are some really great book series that would be on the elementary level that kind of help them imagine the time and place that you're talking about. And then a few books that are just actual stories that you could share with your students. And then a couple of great Hillsdale resources for you as a teacher to hone your knowledge. And then a couple places where I like to grab some of those primary sources. So thank you guys so much. So glad for you to be here again.
If you enjoyed this lecture, we encourage you to visit our website, k12.hillsdale.edu, for additional information on upcoming Hoogland Center events and other free resources for educators.